to the Designer Will See You Now podcast, where we talk health, advocacy, and design. We are your co-hosts. I'm Ola. This is Bella.
Bella.
We are two UX designers who actively or have worked in health tech, and we like to go under the hood of the medical products that we use every day, understanding the design process and some of the challenges associated with making these products. And today we're going to have a little mini episode where we're going to refill our prescription with two different lenses on AI. We're going to be talking about AI for ambient scribing within the medical context, and then also AI's role in memory and grief. So we're very excited for a chatty little quick episode talking about some stuff that's pretty relevant today. So
I came across an article from that almost felt like it was older, but you never know. Like, I don't know what timeline we are on anymore with like AI specifically, because it always goes so fast, right? But I came across an article about that started off talking about human memory and like how we have false memories. That human memory isn't perfect, right? Obviously, like we're not meant to remember every single thing that happens to us. That would be torture almost, I think. We're not meant to do that. I went into a bit of a rabbit hole just looking into that. And it starts off in the article talking about Julia Shaw, who is a criminal psychologist, and she specializes in specifically false memories. And she's warning that generative AI can be a false memory machine, and to back up false memory is just when we recount something in a distorted way, in a way that didn't actually happen. But again, we're not meant to do that. So there's a couple of experiments that I came across too that deal with false memory specifically and prove that we can completely make up like just memories that never happened from what we hear or what we see. One simple example could be that they talk about in the article is that my grandfather used to yell at my grandmother all the time, but after he died, he was the most wonderful man in the world. And this is another psychology expert, actually a professor of psychology and law, and also just a huge expert in memory research, Elizabeth Loftus. She deals with memory research in the context of like court proceedings, which is also relies on witnesses and their memories, and then you bring in the false memories into the game, and yeah, it gets all really like complicated. But one other example, and this has been done a couple of times, I think, this experiment, is that around 25% of adults who were told an untrue story about getting lost in a mall as a kid can be told then by their like family members that, oh, this happened, you were in the mall and you got lost, and through other people telling you about these details or this thing that never happened, you can kind of conjure, or your brain conjures up for you a memory of that, like despite the fact that it never happened. And 25% of adults in this specific experiment were able to create a memory like that, which is crazy. And they'll embellish it with like vivid detail, like what people around them were wearing and like where they were. And yeah, just a really interesting, I don't know, has this ever happened to you?
100%. The mall thing makes me think of, I have this story from when in my head, so when I was 4 or 5 years old, I was living with my family in Singapore. And Singapore in and of itself to me feels like it's probably one enormous false memory, because I think if I went back there, I was so young that if I went back there, I think everything would look so different from the way I remember it like 20 years later. But I do have this one story where I think that this man came up to me while my mom was in the bathroom and I was just standing in the mall. He came up to me asking like what my name is, where I live, and if I want to go get ice cream with him. And I
Okay.
remember running into the bathroom. And ever since then, like to get away from him, ever since then, I've told the story of how, I was almost kidnapped or whatever. But in
Yeah.
my head, like when I hear these things, I'm like, I wonder how much over the years I've added to this story that probably wasn't
Yeah.
true. Like maybe it was just a man who just came up just to check if I was okay. But then
Yeah.
since then, I've kind of built it up in my head. Do you have experiences like that with false memories?
What really resonated with me was when you said if you went back to Singapore now, it would probably be completely different. I kind of have that about um like places because I grew up moving around a lot. So we lived in a lot of different places. There's a lot of different like jumbled up memories of like the houses or the apartments that we used to live in. So I can imagine like my memory of some of the places just is completely like incorrect. Like when I was one of my very first memories actually like at all is that I'm picking figs in a garden in France, which feels like, yeah, that probably happened. There's like figs there. You can pick figs in from fig trees.
Checks out.
And
Checks out.
checks out. And I'm like putting them in this like huge, I mean, for a 5-year-old or whatever, 4 or 5-year-old, a huge like decorative like bowl or something. And I'm like playing with it. But now, like, the more I think about that, I'm like, this is also something that I don't have it right now in my notes, but I've heard somewhere that, and then we'll fact check this, that your memories are only a memory of the last time you remembered the same memory.
Mm.
I think it's something like that. I definitely want to, as soon as this is over, I'm going to go check, but it checks out. Like that's how it feels in my head. Our memories aren't this just like bank of things that we can just, oh, that time in where you were outside the bathroom or whatever, and like your brain doesn't just like reach in there and grab that time and like show it to you again. It's more complicated than that. But yeah, so getting back to the AI part of this, it's like I mentioned earlier. I mean, anyone can Photoshop something and make it look slightly different, right? But now with generative AI, it's becoming so easy for and just accessible to not only like just doctor images a little bit. We're talking like a lot, and we're having a harder time distinguishing between false memories or what actually happened, and that can be intentional or unintentional. um and obviously in the intentional part, you might want to be able to like reframe trauma or help with self-esteem, and there it can be a really good tool for that. Or there's also been published examples of people using AI to help replicate the memory of deceased loved ones. There's tons of money being invested into this. And to just back up to the grief part of this, when a loved one passes away, you go through a grief process, right? And I read a little bit from this neuroscientist called Mary Frances O'Connor, and she's the author of a book called The Grieving Body, where she explores just grief as a concept and talks a bit about it. And she explains that the grieving process is one by which a person learns to reconcile the reality of a person's death with the sense, which is encoded at the neurobiological level in your brain, that they should still be there. So that's a process you're going through where you're trying to like get these two things to connect to each other and make sense. Because obviously we have still this like, I don't know if it's in Asian culture at least, like you have, there's like traditions of like your loved ones coming back to visit you through moths and butterflies. Maybe that's in several other cultures too.
I like that you're bringing up the like the way that different cultures navigate that transition, because I was thinking also, I wonder if once we get into like the discussion about AI, how it's going to change depending on that context. Because like in Mexico, it's the same with Dia de los Muertos and your loved
Yeah.
ones coming back, and celebrating death versus seeing death as a permanent end state. Really interesting in how that might affect people's perspectives on it. But keep going.
Definitely. And that's exactly like we all grieve in like different ways, and there's different traditions around it, and we place different types of meaning onto does a person come back, or do they stick around somehow, or is it completely final? And yeah, it's so that in and of itself is just really interesting. So then the question also becomes, when we're like replicating the way people sound, how like their appearance, we can put that into AI. You're bottling it into something that could be a new interaction. You could speak to somebody, you could like FaceTime them almost, through the help of AI solutions. And yeah, so this is what Mary Frances O'Connor is questioning, like what does that do to our grieving process as we understand it now? Is it going to be something that like actually helps us grieve, or is it going to reinforce the idea that somebody is forever because I can still pick up my phone and ask them a question, or talk to them?
It's really, really interesting because that person can no longer consent to opting in and being used in this way. And that's where the ethics feels very weird for me, because you are then enabling people to basically prop up their
Yeah.
loved one as a puppet for themselves. And that makes it sound a lot more harsh than it is. But I think, to your point with the grieving process, I can imagine that there will be scenarios in which that enables unhealthy behavior, people who can't let go. You're then starting to create this false reality for yourself that you get to live in and immerse yourself in a way where previously you would still, in most cases, you still kind of have to face the reality, no matter how much, how many possessions or how many things you have from that person from before they died. And the consent piece is weird for me.
Yeah. No, 100%. And like I can also see the beauty in like being able to, because sometimes I can think of that, like my grandpa passed away maybe 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, and sometimes I'll be like, oh, and I'm pretty sure this happens to everybody, like, oh, I wonder what that person would have thought about this thing, or it would be nice if that person was here because we could experience this thing together, like things like that. Like I wonder what it would feel like if we were able to frame it in a way that was like Dia de los Muertos, right? Like where it's like a visiting kind of thing, rather than constantly being able to have access to those interactions. You know what I mean? I don't know what that would do to your brain, but yeah, it would be interesting to experience.
I do really like what you mentioned about being able to experience something for the first time with that person and seeing what they might have thought about it. That is like, it's sweet even for me now thinking about it and just imagining, like, interacting with a loved one again. And it's hard to say like where those lines are, because also it's like when you get into something as intimate as interactions with your loved one, who gets to decide what the guardrails are there?
Right.
That's where I could imagine some challenges as we move forward.
Mm,
And again, it goes back to the ethics piece.
definitely. And like you were saying, like who owns then the likeness of my dead grandpa? Like, is it? It's
Yeah.
not me. Like, I don't know. Like, is it the company that makes it? Like, it. Yeah, it's a big
That
unknown.
that was a big discussion when they came out with the latest Anthony Bourdain documentary, and they used his
Mm,
voice to. I can't remember if they used his voice, like they recreated his voice to read out certain passages he had written, or to read
mm,
out scripts. I
that he
can't
hadn't
remember, but
written.
yeah,
Okay.
that he hadn't written. Um,
Mm,
but that was a big like discussion because a people were questioning the ethics
yeah.
of like using his voice in this documentary that's not, made by him. He's not part of
Mm,
it. And then second, who owns that? And ultimately it was his estate that owned
right.
it.
Hmm.
Um, but but now we're getting into this like interesting discussion where you have to determine legally who owns, like you said, like even the physical like manifestation of that person. It makes me think like especially people who've lost a partner,
Mm,
it might be even more difficult to move on and look for other romantic relationships, which I mean that's totally fine as well. There are some people who lose someone they love and they never marry again or they never partner up again.
mm, mm.
Um, but I wonder if this kind of, in some ways, might help more people stay stuck in a way that might not be healthiest for them. It makes me think of the podcast that you sent me, where there was this psychologist who noticed that there were more and more clients coming to her
Mm.
saying, Chat GPT is more empathetic than people in my life, my friends and family and partner,
Right.
whatever. And she was like, well, ChatGPT is a computer program.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get
Exactly.
hungry. It doesn't
No.
get frustrated. It knows exactly
Right.
what you want to hear. And it knows it in a split second, it knows how to phrase things the right way. Whereas
Hmm.
humans need processing times and humans need sleep and food and all these things and are going through their own shit that they
Yeah. Yeah.
have to put aside if you're coming to them with something. So that see the fact that
Mm.
we're seeing more of that and people kind of starting to create these relationships, and I'm very careful in saying that because I think that there's like a lot of like clickbaity headlines of
Oh,
like
definitely.
man proposes to AI, and it's like I'm not talking about that. Like those are
Yeah.
crazy, and like we
Yeah.
don't. I've read it
That's fucking insane.
like that,
Watch you get canceled in like 20 years for saying that.
but yeah, right, right.
Those people are
No,
crazy.
but anyways, what I want to say is that even even for myself, I'm like, there's sometimes stuff that I type into ChatGPT, and I'm like, that's thank you for validating me,
No, 100%.
and
Yeah. And that does
and
something to your brain too, to
yeah,
constantly be fed. I mean, it's just a validating machine, right? So
mhm,
it's never going to question this, relating to specifically like UX, that putting like asking ChatGPT or generative AI to create like a plan for design research or whatever, of like you can put in the craziest shit in there, like find a way to, I'm remembering like um some some people in like the class above me at design school, where their bachelor thesis was like making the police batons like more ergonomic for the
oh
cops. Yeah.
my
Awful.
god,
But so
oh my
that,
god,
side note, but I'm imagining like, hey, ChatGPT, I'm trying to like make this baton like more ergonomic. It's not going to question your, I mean, somebody at school wasn't questioning them either, but that's they should have.
that's crazy. That was a serious
That was
thing that they.
someone's
Oh
like,
wow,
yeah, it was crazy. Or at least I
damn.
don't know if they ever like actually published it or went that far with it, but it was at some point some kind of, yeah, um some kind of project. But if you feed that kind of project, like if you already have like a goal in mind and you feed that in and you're like, hey, help me design some like interviews to find out figure out a better design for this thing. Like it's never going to question your motives.
That's insane though. And that's a great example where it's like you're going to get a manifestation of
Yeah.
your loved one that is not even real, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So, you know,
Yeah, and then
that's a
there,
little,
like we're all to wrap it up in a nice little bow, like is that like what's that false memory going to do for all of us? I don't know.
yeah, that's really interesting. But speaking of AI replacing people in your life, um,
Yes.
I wanted to jump off of that to the idea of AI like replacing your doctor. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is I've seen a lot of companies recently getting into like medical transcription, and
Mm,
there's actually a term for it called ambient scribing. And essentially, it's when AI is recording the conversation that's happening in the room and then it's transcribing it. And then maybe there's some additional features on top of it to parse it and organize it or pull out certain key notes from it. And this has become really, really popular in the context of doctor's visits, and there's a lot of pros and cons to it. We're seeing a lot of funding going into these kinds of ambient scribing tools. One that has been, I think it got like 300 million last funding round, so now it's valued at like over 5 billion. It's called Abridge.
mhm.
And what sets Abridge apart is they have the recording piece and the transcription, but then on top of that, they also help with identifying what the issues are that the patient might be facing, diagnoses, treatment plan recommendations, and then on top of that, also billing documentation, which
Wow.
I was actually like, that's amazing
Yeah.
because navigating, especially in the US, the healthcare system or insurance, healthcare insurance system is a nightmare.
Mm.
And from what I've been reading up for doctors as well, it takes a lot of their like after shift time. They call it pajama time,
Oh.
and it's all the stuff they have to do when they're not meeting with
Mm.
patients. And one of that is documenting visits for billing and for insurance. And so Abridge has set themselves apart from other competitors by adding that piece in as well. And what's interesting with that is on one hand you have all the pros of saving doctors time and mental energy that they have to otherwise spend on busy work and documentation. And what they can then do is they have more energy to either focus on the patients or also focus on their own lives
Mm,
outside of
yeah,
work. Like,
rest.
no, yeah, doctors have notoriously busy schedules. They're very stressful and they might not get to spend as much time with family. And this is something that Abridge has really leaned into with their marketing
Mm,
is I watched their video on their website, and the whole thing, it was so interesting. It was very little about the tool itself and
mhm,
mostly about, I mean, they have a lot of information about that, but what you see front and center is doctors talking about how much more time they now have to spend with their family and to also like pay attention and be present with their patients. And so during the visit, they just set the tool aside and then they can really, make eye contact with the patient and make sure that they're picking up on everything that they're saying and not
mm,
having to worry about taking notes in the meantime. However, if I go into a doctor's office and I'm sitting there and the doctor is recording everything, and then that tool is then providing them with suggestions on diagnoses and treatment plans, at that point where, like, and I'm saying this a little bit tongue in cheek because
mhm,
I would still always prefer to meet with a human doctor.
mm,
Um, does it mean that I have a little bit less trust in my doctor because of their reliance on these tools?
mm,
Does it make them a little bit less like that doesn't mean that they have to do less to stay on top of like the latest studies because they just know that they're going to be fed that by the AI.
Right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Technically, it's like, you're getting the same information, but the depth is not there. And there's so many things that you learn when you do the research yourself that you didn't expect to,
Oh
that you
yeah.
just miss out on when you do
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT. So
No,
very broad,
100%.
broad
Yeah.
question, but
There's a term for that too. What you mentioned, that I like read about when I was doing my research for the episode, um, called like just kind of, I mean, laziness, cognitive laziness, right? Like that's a simplified way to say that, where you exactly what you're describing, where you're like, well, I could do the research myself and like fully like do what I like, in the back of your head, how to do this. And you'll probably, like you said, like learn things along the way that you wouldn't otherwise, or that like get that depth. But with just typing it in ChatGPT, like you're getting something, and then we're relying on it. And there, yeah, that's a phenomenon that's also being studied that I found really interesting. To be honest, I'm trying to be on a little bit of a ChatGPT diet right now. I've been trying to be more mindful about that because I don't want to end up in a place where it's like, oh, now I'm just like fully relying on this, and no one's questioning my motives in my design process. And because we need that, right? We need someone to do that and ask questions and see different perspectives. I think we have a tendency to like think that everything in ChatGPT is like less biased or less prone to incorrect information, but it's written by people, right? It comes from
Mhm.
people at the end of the day. So, and I thought it was
Yeah.
interesting what you mentioned about like trusting your doctor less, because I also do find that like, now I'm like bashing AI, but when applied correctly, it's great. But I do find myself like getting a bit of a bad taste in my mouth too when I see that like companies are using like powered by AI as some kind of like unique selling point, when like that I don't I don't really get that. Uh I mean, fine if it's an application that's like relevant and makes sense and like actually helps with the the use case, or actually improving someone's life. But yeah, just kind of slapping that on there as a sticker, I'm not a fan.
No, I get that. It feels very like
Yeah.
buzzwordy. I do think
Hmm.
that AI in healthcare is one of the strongest applications for
Hmm.
AI at the moment in terms of positive impact. So what I'm curious is like what is going to fill that space now instead, because people are talking about how, again, you can be more present with patients, but does that just mean that doctors are going to be able to see more patients? Is that the
Mm,
answer? Or is there something else that's going to change the relationship that doctors have with, or patients have with their caregivers?
I mean, in Sweden at least, what we're working toward is more like the cues to just get help, like to do a test, a lung function test called a spirometry test. I don't know if you've done one for sure,
Yeah.
but like recently. But it's still just as bad. It's that 6 second test, when you gotta empty out
I could
everything.
barely do it. I can
it's
barely do
it's
it.
insane, like even
Yeah.
for a healthy person, you literally empty your lungs. But that one, for example, like the queue in traditional healthcare, like, or traditional clinics, um to do that test to help get a diagnosis, um is, last person I talked to maybe a couple of weeks ago said it was like they had to wait 3 months to do that test. And it's like it's a 6 second test, and like that's crazy. So it's, for us right now, it's more about like, okay, can we, like, we're already at a point where like the nurses and doctors can't keep up with like the demand or the need for these tests. So we're like lightening the burden, trying to get those queues under control, so like the people who've been waiting for their diagnoses can finally get them without waiting 3 months. But as far as the future, I guess it depends on like the healthcare model, because in Sweden we've got a mixed like public health with private. So is it then for private? I can imagine you want to see more patients, you want to earn more money, you've got the business side of it. But for public health, we're just hopefully lightening the load of an already like just backed up system.
I think for both of the topics that we're talking about, the ultimate like point is that there's so many open-ended questions, there's so many ethical considerations. With the ambient transcription could be an amazing way to, yes, save patients time, make patients feel more heard, and then on top of that also give doctors time back to spend with their families and focus on their health. And then likewise, it could also be used to make it like a patient conveyor belt, basically, because it's as quick as possible. And there's even less focus on the patient because the doctor knows that this AI tool is going to give me the treatment plan. I don't need to spend as much time focusing on this patient. Maybe their case is not as serious. I can focus on more of the serious patients.
Right.
So I think it's just and same thing with the grief piece and manifesting our loved ones after they've passed. I think with all of these things, as potential designers of these kinds of tools in the future, we need to be so mindful of the outcome and the impact that our tools have, and not just kind of blindly designing for the sake of designing with AI. Like you were saying, those companies that just say, oh, powered by AI. But it's what is the ultimate goal with this, and how do we, what could the worst case outcome also be? And is there a way for us to mitigate that?
We're going to also be designing the way in which people interact with generative AI or just AI in general, and all of its applications. So we also need to just be mindful of, just add to what you were saying, of how we design those interactions too, because they're also designed like they don't. I think we tend to think that just AI just kind of happens and it just but there's also design behind that.
Yeah, 100%. It reminds me, a few months ago, the Nielsen Norman Group came out with this article about how AI is changing the UX interface as we know it. And the fact that nowadays, the way that we interact with computer programs is we have a certain outcome in mind, but we don't tell the computer what that outcome is. We take the steps and we basically just tell it what's the next action that you want to take. And then eventually we get it to give us the outcome that we're looking for. Whereas now that's shifting towards, we have an outcome in mind and we tell the computer what that outcome is, and then it takes the action. And then it validates you and it says, that's an amazing idea. We love that. We love that. And then it does it. And it becomes more of a black box too. So I think it's interesting what you're saying about like the interaction piece too. I think that's a really good one to keep in mind.
I want to do this episode again in like a year or two and see if we have answers to our own questions about.
We are like AI manifested versions of ourselves. At that point, we're not even us.
Oh shit. And you guys won't even be able to